瑞城加州硅谷律师事务所李小薇律师和 Michael 李律师信托管理服务需重点考虑的相关事项，娱乐漫谈知性好时光。
好，欢迎大家今天晚上参加我们的讲座。现在是7:33，我们还有朋友陆续上线，所以我们可以一边聊天，然后一边等一下接下来要上线的朋友啊。所以今天我们要跟大家分享的一个主题是关于在加州退休 （Retiring in California） 这样的一个话题。那在我们的实践当中呢，我们有很多的客户，尤其是接近于退休年龄的，甚至是已经退休的客户呢，都会问我们说啊，我是不是要考虑搬到加州以外的州，比如说，比较 popular 的，大家会考虑的，像 Arizona 有 Texas， 还有 Washington State， 还有其他的一些州了。那还有一部分的客户呢，会考虑到说搬到他们以前就是来美国之前所在的国家那这里面包括像大陆的客户可能想回到中国大陆，那台湾的客户呢也有想回到台湾的，尤其是考虑到台湾的healthcare system 可能非常好。很多我的台湾客户都想回台湾，那还有像香港、新加坡，还有其他的像新西兰呐、澳大利亚的客户也都是有。所以其实关于退休在哪里退，怎么退休，其实是这个一直大家特别关心的一个话题。相信呢，我们尤其是我们华人客户，就是大家都会未雨绸缪，提前做好多的 planning，尤其是在financial方面，可能都会给自己去做很多很多的考虑考量，去积累很多的财富啊。那从法律和税务方面，今天我觉得其实我和 Michael 律师更多的想跟大家分享的是，从法律和税务方面有哪些你需要去考虑的。比如说这个，我就先抛砖引玉一下啊，就是这个我们经常听到的说加州最常见的一些问题，比如说这个 income tax 很高，然后再一个是房子特别贵。这都是一些这个我们的客户里面普遍大家非常关心的一些问题。那如果说对比之下的话，那我们加州退休有没有一些好的地方呢？有没有一些特别吸引人的地方，别的州没有的，或者别的国家没有的一些福利呢？那今天呢，我们就会和大家去分享一下啊。首先呢，这个我们还是老规矩啊。我先，sorry，忘了介绍了。如果是加入我们的新朋友，我自我介绍一下，我是我们瑞成律师事务所的合伙人之一李小薇律师。然后，这个在线上的另外一位也是我们今天的主讲人，我们另外一位律师是 Michael 李律师。我们先请 Michael 李律师和大家打一个招呼，然后介绍一下自己。
Oh, greetings all. It's good to see you again. As we are approaching fall here, summer is winding down and the kids are back in school. So it's great to see everybody. As many of you are familiar with me, I'm Mike Lee, one of the founders of RUI Attorneys, and we practice estate planning, estate tax, trust administration, probate administration. So that's our area, and we look forward to giving you some information about retiring in California. We hope you all stay here. So we can look forward to that.
然后还有一个就是我们今天特别要讲，也是我们每次讲座的一个像 housekeeping 的一个 rule，就是我们的讲座只是 for educational purpose only，我们只是为了教育的用途。所以说，如果说您有具体的问题的话，不要参考我们今天讲座的直接的内容，而是一定要来和我们 schedule 一个1对1的一个咨询，针对于您的情况，因为很多的情况下，您会有一些就是特别的，针对于您自己的一些特别的一些信息。那很多的 decision making 呢，其实是一个 tailor-made 的一个 process。所以，我们讲座只是为了教育的用途。如果说您有具体的问题呢，一定要找具体的律师来去咨询，哪怕你不找我们事务所，找其他的律师也都 OK。但是就是这个要具体的案件具体的分析。 OK，那还有一个就是我，这个每一次讲座之前，还会跟大家去分享一个我们每个月哈，或者是这个新闻当中很值得关注的一些信息，或者说是我们在职业过程当中我们遇到有哪一个点，我们就会特别跟大家去强调一下，大家要注意的。那这个月呢，其实我和 Michael Lee 律师，我们特别想给大家分享的一个点，就是我们现在越来越多的情况下发现，就是很多的brokerage account 有一些就是金融理财的一些机构了啊，他们在做这个遗产信托规划，在指定这个 account 的受益人的这样的一些方面有非常非常严格的规定。那最近我们有引看了这家金融机构，我就不说是哪一个机构了啊，就是你如果仔细的去读它里面的很多的内容的话，你会发现有好多的情况下的话，客户实际上是没有办法去直接的去指定一些可以去规避就是遗产认证程序的一些受益人去进行受益。所以就是举一个例子来说，这里面我们给大家举的一个例子，第一个，比如说就是如果说你有未成年的受益人的话，那 financial institution 也就是它是允许你可以放在上面的，但是如果说你指定未成年人去做你的一些金融理财账户的受益人的话，一个最大的问题就是说，它会经过你可能避免了 probate 的，就是遗产认证的程序，但是你相对的你要经历的是有一个 guardianship 的 procedure，就是未成年人的监护人的程序，那个程序实际上是更复杂的一个法庭程序，要每年报备啊或者什么的，然后另外一个就是说，在受益人的指定上面呢，甚至是他不允许你指定我们叫 contingent beneficiary。什么叫 contingent beneficiary？就是他只允许你指定第一位的受益人。但是如果说，比如说第一位的受益人，他他有这个失去意识行为能力，或者说过世的这种情况的话，那 again 你的这个 account 就要重新有这个遗产认证啊这方面的一些问题。所以 essentially 这不是一个在我们遗产信托律师来看来的话，它不是一个 complete 的一个 planning。但是因为本身这些金融机构可能它是有一些他们内部的一些规定，或者他们 legal department 的一些 rules，实际上你是无法去达成的一个 complete 的一个estate planning 的 process 的。所以如果你遇到这样的情况的话呢，你可以联系我们事务所，然后去咨询一下，看看有没有什么其他的方法可以做一些规划，或者说有一些情况下，可能你就要考虑去就换另外一家 financial institution 了，因为它本身可能从 estate planning 的角度来讲，就是不是一个特别 friendly 的。那在另外一个角度来讲呢，就是说，我遇到的最长的一个咨询，也是大家要注意的，就是关于 crypto assets、cryptocurrency 数字货币资产它的遗产规划。那很多的金融机构，它目前允许你去 trade 所谓的数字货币资产，但是它却不允许你去做相应的给这部分资产去做相应的遗产财产规划，或者说信托规划。如果是这种情况的话，尤其是对于有一些像我们有的客户的话，他的数字资产实际上是占非常大的比例的，而且有相当的资产的。那这个时候呢，你如果假设就是你出现失去意识行为能力或者过世的这个情况的话，那会对这个资产造成非常大的在执行方面的困难，甚至是损失。所以呢，其实对这部分资产如何去做规划，也是一个很大的一个问题，可能现代人很多人都要考虑的问题。那其实呢，在下个月，在9月25号，下个月9月25号，下一个月的讲座当中，我们会具体的对金融类的资产，尤其是包括数字货币类的资产，如何去做规划，去做一个专门的专题的讲座。所以，如果说您有一些数字货币，或者是有相当的金融资产的客户，这个朋友，也欢迎您下个月去关注我们的讲座啊。那讲座的信息我们会在今天讲座的最后发给大家。OK， 好，那接下来呢，我们就这个言归正传，讲回我们在加州退休的 这件事情。首先就是我觉得我和 Michael Lee 律师，我们先从轻松的开始聊起啊，这个接下来再去聊一些比较专业的话题。我和 Michael Lee 律师，我觉得我们两个人可以代表的是就是两种居住在加州的人，我们不可能代表所有的，但是我觉得我们至少能够代表两类。那Michael 律师你可以介绍一下你自己，但是我知道 Michael 律师是我们经常这 joke 啊，就说他就是一个 California， 就是这 pure California， 就是几乎就是在 California 出生，然后一直到现在，然后也在 California 读的大学，然后一直工作也都在 California。所以 What do you think? Why do you like California?
Well, it's any number of reasons. And I often tell this joke. I said, the only thing I like more than complaining about California is actually living in California. So myself, I was born here. And not only was I born here, my Chinese ancestors came here in 1840. I'm the fifth generation Chinese Californian that have been here. We've been here forever. And we've never left. And I think that actually says something kind of interesting about Asian Americans in California, is it tends to be a really good fit. It's a diverse state. It's economically lively. It has sort of everything that we want, good health care, good jobs, good education, good shopping amenities, a lot of things that we like. And I think that's the hard thing. For part of my life, I grew up in rural Eastern California. For a period of time, I served as an assistant U.S. attorney in Nevada. It's very different when you actually live out there compared to Silicon Valley. So for me, retiring in California, I've always considered, I'll move someplace. But nothing. This is one situation where the grass is not greener on the other side of the fence, at least in my experience. I always look, this grass is so nice, and it's attractive. So I'm sure Xiaowei has a lot of thoughts of what has kept her in California as well.
我自己我是觉得说，就是因为我其实not only 我以前当然我最早的时候是在中国大陆，然后生活从北到南我都有生活过，然后我来到美国之后，其实我的经历有在中西部生活过，然后后来才到加州的，然后到了加州之后，真的就是尤其北加州，其实我是非常非常喜欢的，就是不管从这个气候，从outdoor activities，然后那当然因为我们也很喜欢，比如说滑雪啊，喜欢wine tasting 红酒啊，喜欢就是一些这个户外运动啊这些的，从各个方面来讲，像气候这些，我都觉得加州是一个最好的选择。就是刚才 Michael Lee 律师也提到了，在实际我们consult 客户的这个情况下哈，有好多客户都会跟我们讲说我想要搬离加州，但是实际情况是 Michael Lee 律师也可以 share 你的 case。实际的情况是我有不少的客户其实搬到了别的州之后，甚至是搬回了中国之后，其实因为他在北加这边已经生活了几十年，他根本没有办法去适应一个新的州，一个新的环境。就是所以一般来讲，我们会就是如果说找我们去聊 retirement plan 的这个情况下，一般来讲，我们给客户的一个我觉得最直接最有用的一个建议就是你的 plan 要 flexible。keep your plan flexible， 这个我觉得是最重要的。就是你不能说有的客户我觉得他还没有特别去 plan 好，特别去想好的时候，他把他的房子也给卖了，然后他把他的很多的东西都给liquid， 然后就直接就搬过去。但是搬过去一段时间，发现不喜欢，想要搬回来。那我们知道，一旦你离开了加州，再回来是非常难的一件事情。有很多的原因，那其中，像有一些客户的话，就是有房子的问题。那你当时买房的时候，你的 property tax， 当然等一下我们会具体来讲一个 property tax。你买房的时候是一个很低的 property tax， 然后你只需要付很低的 property tax，就地税。但是你一旦把它卖掉了之后，你离开了加州，然后你再回来，你再重新买房的话，那你再买房又要根据新的价格来去缴这个地税，而这个地税是每年都要去缴的。那对于已经退休的人来讲的话，那应该是相当的 一部分的钱，因为你退休基本上很多人是在一个 fixed income 的情况，所以如果说地税每一年都要有很多的话，考虑到再加上尤其北加这个高房价，就是 average 高房价的这个情况的话，这会成为你retirement 当中一个非常大的一部分的 expense。I don't know if Michael has anything to add about this.
Oh, about what?
Oh, about in general the property tax. Once you move out of the state, it's very difficult to come back.
Oh, it is very difficult to move back, mainly because there is the resetting of the property tax. That is hard. It's hard with increasing cost of living. It's hard to find a suitable property. So it is, coming back to California is a challenge.
Yeah. So what are your the concerns of your clients when they stay in California? Can you elaborate?
Well, they're the things that I complain about all the time whenever I am basically every day about California as I go around and think, cost of living is so high. Why is this so expensive? I went to Singapore and everybody says Singapore is so expensive. I said, Singapore is the cheapest place on earth. Have you ever been to Silicon Valley? Silicon Valley, everything's expensive. People said, oh, but these noodles are $12. I said, they're 24 in Silicon Valley. 12 is a steal. And then they say, well, in Malaysia, it's only $3. I say, well, apples to oranges here. Cost of living is high. Housing is very expensive, obviously. It appears that property taxes are high because values are high. But this is a grass is greener on the other side of the fence. Make sure you're comparing apples to apples. We'll talk about property taxes. That may not be true, actually, when you look at other states. So, income tax high, it perceived the property taxes are high. Cost of living is high. Crowds and traffic. This is another one. Perceived. I was dropping my kids off at school over by Saratoga, and I thought, there's so much traffic over here. But then, have you ever been to Dallas at any time of the day? Yeah. Traffic's even worse. So, there are concerns, and this is the hard thing for retiring is, are the concerns perceived as special to California? Or is this just daily hassle that's a reality of life that regardless of anywhere in the world, people have these same concerns? Is it actually California and it will be different in the other state? Or is this just a reality of life?
Right, yeah. 我觉得就是这个 common concern， 其实刚才 Michael 律师也讲了，我之前有这个在之前也大概提一下，其实大概主要就是几个方面了，一个是就是从生活成本角度来讲的话，一般人会觉得说美国相对来讲是比较高的，尤其是湾区北加这边，这个生活成本是非常高的，这个各方面就是花钱可能就花的比较多，但是你退休了之后的话，可能对于大多数人来讲的话，可能你的收入相对来讲就比较固定，然后你就会考虑每个月你的 budget。那如果说你的生活成本高的话，那你可能可使用的收入就少了，这个是个简单的数学啊。然后另外就是那近年来房价那是非常高的，那几乎我觉得在加州整个来讲的话，其实还是可以找到很便宜的房子。但是从北加来讲，尤其是南湾区，我们大部分客户所在的区域，从这个方面来讲的话，其实真的是，就是房价相对来讲真的是特别特别高。然后而且，就是如果你看这个，好多就是好像全美最贵的房子的城市的话，那我们北加是远远的，就是大多数远远的超出其他的任何的地方。这个很多的 zip code 都是美国最贵的地方之一了。然后另外一个就是接下来我们重点会给大家分析的，就是有很多人会觉得说加州的税高。包括你现在你不用讲退休这件事情，我们有一些高收入的客户的话，其实他们的 planning 之一都是离开加州。那其实等一下 Michael 李律师也会具体的给大家讲一下，因为我们也看到好多 离开加州，但是也没有离开加州，然后因为一些 improper planning 不恰当的规划，那实际上给他们造成了很大的税务方面的麻烦，包括被税务局 audit 呀这样等等。所以等一下具体的再跟大家再来分析一下啊。OK， 好，那我们接下来就具体的从法律和税务的两方面，然后来给大家看一下，就是从退休规划角度来讲的话，有哪些规划你需要去做。首先呢，我们从法律方面主要是关于不同类型的资产，你要考虑要去做哪些遗产方面的规划，主要是信托规划啊。首先从房子的角度来讲，那我相信大部分的我们的客户，华人里面大家都会有的资产就是都是房产房产是我们华人客户最喜欢的持有的一类资产。那就是哪怕即使你没有投资房的话，大多数人也肯定会有的是一个自住房。那你的自住房和投资房呢，一般来讲，最常见的就是把它们放到一个可撤销生前信托里面，这个就是 the basic， 就最基本的你需要去做的。如果说你现在连这件事情都没有做，但是你打算退休，已经接近退休年龄，然后或者说你已经退休了，那我觉得今天我们讲座完以后，您第一件事要考虑的就是先把自己的自住房，先把自己的房产放到可撤销生前信托里面。那如果是 investment properties 呢，其实有一些其他的一些 planning 有可能需要你去考虑去做，尤其是考虑到目前呢，就是说遗产税马上会降低到从1400万每个人会降低到大概700万，600到700万左右每个人。如果说你持有相当的 investment properties 投资资产，尤其是有一些这种比如说仓库啊，然后厂房啊。然后还有一些这个大型的公寓，还有一些商业地产啊这些的，你都需要去考虑的，在房产上面可能要做一些更 advanced 的、更高阶的一些规划了。因为除了你有遗产认证 probate 遗产财产传承的问题，你还要注意的是你的资产会有遗产税的问题，所以你需要在你生前去把它去做一些规划，尤其是我觉得，有小孩的家庭，那可能你希望你的小孩可以最大程度的去继承到你们的财产，实现家族的财富的传承。但是如果说你不提前做好这些规划，大部分资产都要消耗在税务上面，那我觉得就是一个比较遗憾的一件事情啊。然后另外一个就是financial assets，financial assets 这个我们下一次讲座会给大家具体的就是拿出来讲。financial assets 当然就包括像 stocks， 像一般的就是你投资的金融资产、股票类的基金啊这些的，这个都是一些金融资产，它的 planning 是有一些特殊的，你可能需要去考量的一些部分，尤其是 considering，我们今天在讲座之前有 warn 大家的，有一些 financial institution 可能大家平时都没有注意到，它有非常严格的限制你怎么去指定受益人，甚至去做一些 estate planning trust transfer 的一些条款，你可能没有办法去达到这个就是去避免 probate 的目的，那这个时候可能你就要想其他的一些办法了啊。然后第三个就是 business interest， 这个是非常复杂。我们以前也做过一个讲座，我们请 Michael 简单给我们讲一下 how to plan for your business succession.
Yes, so this for business interest and business succession, a big concern is the location of the business, the operations of the business. So this in relation to retirement planning is a major concern for one pre-retirement planning. So if I'm going to retire, what am I going to do with the business? Am I actually going to liquidate it? Am I going to turn the business over to my kids? How are we going to administer this? Am I going to keep the business interest and then so I'm going to keep, let's say, the stock of my closely held business, and then the management's going to be my kids or other persons? This can get very complicated, and it can be particularly complicated if we have this interstate problem that I'm living in, Colorado or something, but then the business is governed by California, and then my estate is now going to be governed by Colorado. We can have a lot of complexity here. And then we'll see in a moment, due to taxation, that might actually not be helpful for me at all, as we'll see in a few moments.
对，就是如果说你真的是持有一个比较valuable 的一个家族 business 企业，就这个其实虽然我们华人在湾区并没有就是时间特别特别久，当然也就是我们做的很多的客户也有一些就是他们大概是18几年过来的这种特别久的家庭，但是大部分的移民可能是比较 recent 的，但是我们其实也已经看到有一些比如说家庭在传承的一些企业啊，一些这 business interest， 如果是你有这个情况的话，一定要提前做好规划，因为如果不提前做好规划的话，你的business 会一团糟一团乱，然后没有任何的就是引领，会给这个 business 造成巨大的损失。更何况有一些情况下，还有这个很严重的有一些税务的方面的一些问题都会交杂在一起，所以提前给你的 business 做好 estate planning 是非常非常重要的。下一个就是 retirement plan， 相信我们很多朋友因为给不同的公司工作，或者说是你自己会有存一些这个 retirement account。那 retirement account 的话，这个就是相信大家都有自己的 financial advisor， 都会给大家去介绍一些，比如说IRA Roth IRA 的区别是什么，怎么去 convert， 是不是需要去 convert， 然后以及像 RMB required minimum distribution， 然后怎么去拿这些的。所以从 estate planning 的角度来讲的话，其实大家要最重要的一点其实就是要指定受益人，因为一般的 retirement account 是不可以去把它直接放到一般的可撤销生前信托里面的，所以你一定要注意的是你的 retirement account 要有受益人。那如果说没有受益人的情况，有一些 financial institution 可能会默认，不是所有的，可能会默认是你的 spouse， 如果是你已婚的，因为我们加州的就是community property rules， 就是夫妻共同财产制，可能会有这样的一些默认。但是如果说你不希望是你的 spouse， 然后有一些这个一般来讲你要签一个 waiver， 就是要签一个另外就是你的 spouse 要签这个 waiver， 所以你要指定其他的受益人。那如果说你是单身状态的话，那你就一定要指定受益人。那这时候会有一个 complication 是说，如果说你指定的受益人是未成年人的话，可能会有一定的复杂性在里面。那有一些情况下，我们可以给客户去做一些特殊的一些 planning。如果说你有这方面的需求，你可以联系我们。然后还有一个就是大家特别常用的，在retirement plan 里面常用的一个工具，一类 asset 就是人寿保险类，比如说人寿保险、年金，还有就是这1-2年来大家讨论特别多的 long-term care。其实从我们事务所的观点来讲，因为我们长时间接触这类的案件，我个人认为，然后 Michael 律师当然也是这个观点了。我们认为，就是像人寿保险类的产品，其实在你的 retirement plan 里面是非常非常重要的一类资产。如果说你没有的话，可能你需要。就是一定要考虑，尤其是年纪越大的话，这类资产它就更 valuable。像 life insurance 类的话，一般来讲，如果是一般的保险类，可能你只需要去指定受益人。但是如果是大额的保险的话，我们一般会建议客户去做成人寿保险信托的形式。那它的好处就是在人寿保险信托内的你的 death benefit， 你的最后的赔偿的金额，这部分是没有遗产税的问题的。long-term care 我相信很多financial advisor 也有给大家介绍过，其实也是就是我们认为在你的 plan 里面必不可少的一类产品了。原因是什么呢？就是因为其实从我们自己职业的角度来看，我看好多的客户，现在其实年龄 越活越大，就是突然死亡、突然去世的这个情况，当然也是有的。但是其实大多数的情况是人到了一定的年龄，甚至现在也有年轻化的趋势。比如说你突然中风了 （stroke、heart attack），然后你有一些 disability，或者是你有 dementia、Alzheimer's，像这些你没有办法自己去穿衣服，自己去照顾自己的寝食，就是那就是这些这个衣食住行啊，这些方面的话，那这个时候如果说你可以每个月能够拿到一笔固定的钱的话，其实是非常非常 valuable 的，所以我们会 encourage 大家去考虑这方面的一些金融人寿保险类、长期护理类的财产的产品。OK。好，从法律的方面呢 ，estate planning 的角度呢，我们先就给大家介绍到这儿。那接下来，我想是大家特别觉得 excited 的部分，就是我们要开始讲税了。然后这个我们特别是有请这个 Michael Lee 律师啊，Michael Lee 律师是我们事务所的税务律师啊，我们请 Michael Lee 律师可能多给我们分享一下，在加州退休是不是税就这么可怕呢？我们就不能考虑在加州退休，然后同时也是一个很好的对于我们来讲税务的决定嘛？这个 Michael Lee 律师，要不然这个您先开始从头给我们讲一下，分析一下你在这方面的一个观点。
Okay, well, this is an interesting topic about the retirement planning in California. Is it is not always necessarily true that your overall tax will be lower if you leave California. So there's this sort of customary wisdom that we say, well, if we always leave California, the tax will always be lower. That's not always true. Like anything, there's a joke, if you assume you make a blank out of you and me because of the way assume is spelled. Assuming, you have to understand what the assumptions are. Because depending on what are the facts, just like mathematics, the given, depending on what the given is, the result is different. So in some situations, yes, the tax will be lower if you leave, but not always. So one of, I'll go through them sort of in order here. One of the things, first off, income tax. So good news for retirees, Social Security income is subject to state taxation, but not California. So California, we have different.
Sorry, I think we have a typo here, and I think we meant Social Security income is not subject to California taxation.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, and I think what we have here is kind of yeah. Social Security income can be subject to state taxation depending on what the state does. So California does not tax Social Security. Some states do. So for retirees who have a larger percentage of income coming from Social Security, California, that's attractive. Other states that tax all income, including Social Security, not as attractive. The other thing that is helpful in California is we have a progressive tax system, progressive in the sense that we have graduated rates. It starts low, it goes up and up and up and up. That's bad for those on the higher side. It's good for those on the lower side. This can be a bit of a problem is some states have a flat tax. Colorado is about like 4%. Michigan's like 4%. A lot of them are around 4%. So that isn't necessarily better for you if you go from a graduated system to a flat system overall. It can sometimes be worse.
So Michael, can I make the conclusion that if you, after you retire, if your income is mainly Social Security and you do not have high income, for example, you have $80,000 each year, then California may not necessarily be a bad state for you.
Might not necessarily be a bad state for you. And it's, again, I actually, I gotta go grab this thing, my wheels diagram of my son's toy when he was a kid. You turn one wheel down, you turn other wheels up. Do remember we're thinking about, and retirees, you need to think about overall. So we have 4 situations of tax here: income, then capital gains is a subset of income, property, and then estate. So what a retiree would really have to take a look at is income. Also take a look at deductions. If you are a low income earner in California, and let's say you're a retiree and you rent, California also gives a tax deduction for a certain amount for rental. If it's generally income under $86,000 thereabouts, you have a deduction there. A lot of states don't have that. So you have to combine these things all together. So income tax, not necessarily better when you go to another state. They can be lower for higher income earners, sometimes not. This is the second one going on to capital gain.
Sorry, Michael, let me just summarize what you just said in Chinese so that people who do not speak English well can understand. 这个就是我觉得就是我们首先就是给大家想这个讲的一个点就是在你看税的时候，你不是说就是只看一种税。就是因为我们生活在美国，税是有各种各样的，所以你在做一个税务规划的时候，就是你不能说只是说看，比如说 income tax， 你还要考虑的是其他的 tax。其实这个是我们就是想要给大家传递的一个中心思想啊。然后我们就接下来就具体的来看每一个税。那每一个税的话，是不是就是加州就是这么的可怕？那 Michael 律师刚才第一个讲的就是关于收入税啊。那在收入税里面，我们觉得就是有2个点要特别跟大家去强调一下。第一个点就是说，在加州你退休的时候，你的 Social Security 你的社安这部分的收入的话，这个是没有州税的。这个是第一个点。那你要知道为什么要强调这个点呢？是因为有很多其他的州是有这个州税的但是加州是没有。然后第二个点呢，我们要强调的就是加州的这个税务，加州的税务是一个我们叫Michael 刚才讲是一个就是 graduated 一个 system， 是一个递进型的。然后但是很多其他的州呢，它是一个就是扁平型的。递进型的它的一个好处就是说，当你的收入没有那么多的时候，你的税率就没有那么高。但是如果是扁平型的话，不管你的收入是多少，你的税率可能都是相同的，都是一样的。所以从这个角度来讲，那最后我刚才就问Michael 一个问题，就是说，如果说你退休之后，你的大部分的收入都是 Social Security income， 如果你的收入相对来讲没有那么高，你变成了一个不是那么高的一个这个 earner 的话，那这个时候加州对于你来讲的话，从收入税角度来讲，可能就没有那么的不友好。OK， 就和你当时工作的时候是不一样了。那我接下来其实就是我 follow up 的一个问题，就是也是我们要引出的第2点，就是关于 capital gain 的问题。其实我们大多数的华人了，其实都是有一定的资产的，所以即使退休了，大家现在都可能都会把自己的退休都 plan 好，即使退休了，可能也是一个high income 的 earner。So a lot of our Asian clients, they may also have high income after they retire. And one component I think is very important for our Asian clients' portfolio is real estate or stocks. And so I think, that you can explain that part to
the
us.
Capital gains.
Yes, the capital gains.
Here's one other twist that I also want to throw in with regard to income tax and moving, and a lot of our clients, Asian clients, with real estate, is a lot of clients say, oh, well, great, I'll move to Reno or I'll move to Las Vegas or something like that. Say, you do own 9 California rental properties. They say, yeah, I'm going to keep them. I'm going to live off that. Then it doesn't matter so much that you move to Nevada, because California will still tax all California source income. So unless you plan to liquidate all of those California homes, liquidate the 9 California homes, and incur all the California capital gains and federal income tax, and federal capital gains, basically, absorb all of those capital gains, it doesn't really make sense from an income tax standpoint if I still have all kinds of California source income. If I say, well, I'm just going to take Social Security and have just a little bit here and there, okay, maybe the income's okay. But if I still have a lot of California source, I'm going to have a problem. The same way, if I want to do like this often generally doesn't work, is if I have a traditional Roth or a traditional IRA and I want to do the conversion to the Roth, I say, oh, I'll go do that in Nevada, and then I'll get around California. No, if you earned it here and you do the conversion, you're going to owe the state where you earned it. California polices this very, very carefully. So be a little bit cautious with some cleverness on moving around tax-wise, because you may move physically, but unless you move everything, you move all of your assets, if there's a remnant of California source, that source income as it continues will still be taxed in California. Continuing on is, I think what Xiaowei was alluding to as well, is be aware that if you go to a state that is not a community property state, and there's only 8 of them, California is one of them, but there's only 8 of them. So for example, I go to Florida and I say, oh, I love, no income tax in California, in Florida, that's great. And I love high humidity and I love insects, I'm going to go live in Florida. That's my place. Do be careful in this situation. First, let's talk about real estate. One is what I just talked about. I'm going to have to get rid of my California real estate if I don't want that source income. So if I'm going to leave the family house here and I'm going to rent it, well, that rental is still going to pay California income tax. So I say, oh, well, I don't want to do that. What if I sell it? Well, then you're going to incur capital gains tax on all of that, appreciation. That's kind of suboptimal. That doesn't look so good. Okay, fine. I say, well, I just brought, it's a brand new property. I just bought it. There's no, not significant capital gains. Okay, I'll sell that. I'll move over to Florida. Okay, fine. But do remember, they're not a community property state. So step up in basis does not work in the community property way, which is the way it works in California. I'm husband, I have wife, I pass away, 100% of the capital assets get reset, basis stepped up to fair market value on the date I passed away. Everything, 100%, all of the house, all of the rental, all of the stock that's not retirement, it all gets stepped up 100%. It doesn't matter what the title was. It just matters whether it was community property. But be careful if you are not in a community property state like Florida. Florida, even I own it husband and wife together, it only gets stepped up half. So we don't have that technique that we have in California, where husbands can stay together, or I would say, or husband and wife could be together. We own husband and wife together. I pass away as husband. In California, that steps up the basis in the property to 100%. My wife could sell the primary residence. She could sell the rental. She could sell the stock, tax-free, capital gains tax-free. The basis is stepped up. She could sell it. But in Florida, it's only going to be half. So the basis, if I, let's say, bought at 100,000 and it's now $1 million, then basically what would happen is that it would step up 500,000 on half, and then she'd have a basis of 450 on her side. So she'd have 450 of capital gains if she sold on her side. The same way with stock, it's a little bit more complicated because it depends how titling works, and under the marital law, who it belonged to. So that can be a little bit complicated for stock as to whether the amount, if it's truly my separate property, it would be stepped up 100%. If it was marital property, generally only half. So that can be also a problem for retirees, because I have a lot of retirees that we think about in the California way, where husband and wife say, well, we'll stay together. We don't want to sell the house. We don't want to sell the rental, because if we sell the rental or the house during our lifetime, we'll incur a lot of capital gains. So we're just going to enjoy, we're going to stay put, stay where we are. But we do know if something happens to us, we'll downsize then. We'll make changes then. because that will wash out all the capital gains. And then if we want to reconfigure and sell, no problem, no tax. That does not work outside of the 8 community property states. You only have 50-50. So it's, better than doing it while you're both living, but it's not as good as California. So this is another one with like overall tax. Well, overall, that may not be necessarily better. So let's introduce this one, because this is a big concept that can be missed here, and then we can take a look at property tax next.
对，我给大家总结一下刚才Michael 律师讲的。首先第一个是说，就是关于 rental property， 就是因为我们很多华人都有出租房，如果你有出租房的话，你搬到别的州，其实就是你这个我想很多人其实是知道的，因为出租房你的收入就是房地产的收入相当于是你在加州 do business 的收入，所以这部分的收入的话还是有加州的税务的相关的一些问题的，所以就是这个当然我相信很多的朋友今天参加我们讲座都是知道的。但是第二个就是我们在做 consultation 的过程当中，我发现很多人其实忽略的就是虽然就是为什么讲就加州让我们又爱又恨，就是我们加州还有一个法律就是 community property law。community property law 相信大家都不陌生，就是如果结婚的朋友都知道，就是夫妻共同财产。那在美国呢，大概有9个州是夫妻共同财产 community property state， 它是继承了西班牙法系的这个 community property 的法律啊。那它很多人就是这个他会比较苦恼的是说，有一些客户他会觉得说那很难去定义资产的性质，尤其是有一些在比较晚进入婚姻，就是你在进入婚姻之前你已经积累了相当的资产，或者说是有一些情况下比如说两方可能有一方资产相对来讲比较多，另外一方的话可能相对来讲资产少，这样的一些情况下的话，有很多人实际上是不是很喜欢 community property law 的。但是从tax 的角度来讲的话，因为我们是 community property state， 是夫妻共同财产州，所以说有一个税务方面的法律对我们来说是非常好的，就是如果说夫妻当中有一个人去世的这样的一个情况下，然后你卖掉资产，你卖掉可能是房子，可能是股票。当然，Michael 律师刚才讲的股票的话，有一些特殊的，有一些比较复杂的一些分析了。那房子其实就相对来讲更直观一些。那如果是夫妻2个人共同财产，有一个人去世的这种情况下，如果你卖掉房子，那实际上你的房子的税基会上升到你最后一个人，就是就是你的配偶去世的时候的那个税基，而不是你当时买房的时候的那个税基。那因为税基增加了，所以说你卖房的 fair market value 减去你的税基，这个值就会变小。那变小的话，你缴税就没有那么多了，甚至是如果你马上卖的话，甚至可能是几乎为0这样的一个情况。所以很多这个剧烈增值的资产，可能你并不需要去缴 capital gain tax 资产增值税。所以简单的给大家讲就是这样的一个概念，但是具体的操作方面呢，其实是有一定的讲究和复杂性的，所以你如果要去具体的操作的话，还是要请教专业的律师和会计师。OK， 然后接下来呢，其实Michael 律师可能要讲的就是关于 property tax 的问题了。我想可以请 Michael briefly introduce property 13 and property 19 to our audience.
Yes. So this is the first one, is that this is, and this actually goes all the way back to, Prop 13, and then we have Prop 58, and then it's Prop 19 now because, it's changed. But basically this, and this is a little bit of a special California thing that goes back to what Prop 13 is, which is still the law. It's just modified to some extent by Prop 19. So 13, 19. And it's basically this, is that we assess property taxes and assess by creating the base value at the time one acquires it. So when there's a change of ownership. So when I buy my house, that sets the property tax basis. And then it can only go up year over year about 1%-ish, so much. Generally, there's some other mellow rules and stuff like that, but let's say just general property tax. It's basically set when I buy the property at about 1% or so year over year. It can go up. So I will not have generally big swings, big increases in my property tax in California. If I buy a property in a nice place and the property value increases and increases, my property tax generally doesn't increase at a substantial clip. This, interestingly enough, even though we're very used to this as Californians, is not really the norm in most states. Most states essentially assess the property tax based on county averages, and that they will increase. Property tax will increase as property values increase, and it can often be more than 1% per year, and it can increase at a greater percentage, or if it's capped, it can sometimes even capped over a certain at a certain percentage per year. It can increase very quickly. So they may say not more than 3 or 4% per year, but they'll do it year over year over year over year. So it can be quite significant. So that's the first thing in that one would want to explore in looking at a new residence outside of California is, how does your property tax system work in terms of if my home increases in value? Is my property tax going to increase at a clip faster than 1%? The other thing that's important to take a look at is, how does the property tax system actually work in that state? Because this was something I was taking a look at in Florida. I was traveling around there. Everybody talks about Florida, and looked at the property tax rates and said, oh yeah, actually often 0.9, 1%, and then no income tax. Yeah, that's pretty good. But actually look at a Florida property tax bill. You often will have that 0.9, 1%-ish property tax, but then you'll often have a school tax and a zoning tax and all these additional taxes, which if you look up, just straight in Google, et cetera, and you say property tax, they say, oh, it's only 1%. And then if you actually look, well, what do you actually pay? You say, well, what's all this extra 1%, extra 1%? They say, well, that's not property tax. That's the school tax. That's the school board tax. And then that's actually the local district tax, because you're in District 7 and you get to use the park. And it looks kind of like what we have with Melrose, is all of a sudden you get all these extra, fees and taxes. So at first blush, you think, oh, the property tax looks comparable, but that's not the out the door bill. There's more tacked onto the bill. So that, and it usually has to do with school boards and school assessments, to tell you the truth. It usually has to do with that. So if you're searching around, look for like school taxes and things like that. That can be a sleeper for property tax, where it's not actually the same thing. So the tax rate, while it appears to be the same, it is not, because there are additional fees or taxes that get tacked on, and that 1% basis may change. I had this with Washington. Washington does an average, year over year over year for different areas. Client lived on an island. There was no bridge. Properties weren't valuable because you had to take a ferry. They built a bridge and they have a view of Seattle. The property increases like 10 times. So does the tax very quickly. So that's a problem. So this is something that we can introduce.
Okay, great. 这个地方也简单给大家说一下关于 property tax 的问题哈，就是那我们知道前2年加州 passed 了 Proposition 19之后，大家可以说一片哗然啊，很多人就是很不喜欢 Proposition 19。当然 Proposition 19主要是在房屋继承方面其实是有非常大的影响，但是在这里面我们其实想讲的是说，那我们不是讲的是一个继承的问题，而是关于地税在加州每一年不会被就是彻底的重新的评估的这样的一件事情。因为 obviously 我们刚才讲了，在你退休的时候，可能你的收入就会变得非常的就是固定，然后那如果是你的 你的 property tax 根据房价，因为房价我们知道，尤其在湾区这样的一个情况下的话，那可能现在跟5年前、10年前、20年前，那真的是就是天差地别。如果说你的房屋的它的property tax 每年要根据房价一直在这样涨的话，那对于退休人士来说的话，其实是非常不友好的。那从加州的角度来讲的话，加州实际上是基本上是非常固定的一个 property tax。像我们有的客户，他们就有一个我们叫 magic combination，就是他们这个继承房子是发生在 property 19之前，然后他们的 property tax 的 basis 是他们父母给他们留下房子的时候，当时那个 property tax 的 basis，所以有好多人现在他的房子的 property tax 可能就是几千块钱，甚至有的可能就1-2千块钱那样都不到，因为他们那个房子当时父母买的房价实在是太低了。然后后来继承，他们又发生在 Property 19之前，所以又继承了父母的低的 Property Tax basis。所以在加州，哪怕即使是 Property 19 pass 之后，其实从全美来看的话，它的地税实际上是已经是一个非常非常友好、非常 friendly 的一个州了啊。那 Michael 律师刚才也讲，我们其实另一个我们职业的州是华盛顿州 Washington State。Washington State 的 property tax 其实是每一年都被重新会reassess 的。那 combined with 等一下我们要讲的 state tax，那其实 Washington State 不是一个特别理想的你去持有real property for retirement planning 的这样的一个州。OK， 好 ，Michael， 那我们可以继续 estate tax part。
Yes, so this is a kind of a surprise to a lot of people, but it's a happy surprise. Oddly enough, California, the one tax that we don't have is a state estate tax. Essentially, in the early 2000s and the late 90s, essentially our estate tax faded away because the credit for state estate taxes faded away. So it went away in California. We do not have a state estate tax. We just have the federal. But as Xiaowei just mentioned, many states, many popular states where people like to retire, have a state estate tax. And they can be quite high, 20 to 16%. And often the exemption amount can be lower. So we're used to, like right now, it's 13 million. Post 2025, it'll be 5 million. Some states, the exclusion amount is 2 million. And then the rate occurs at the amounts over 2 million. So, and again, 20 to 16% is not low. And there's also not a credit for state estate taxes. It doesn't quite credit or deduct against federal. So sometimes you could be paying 50-something% on this. So classically, Washington and Oregon have these state estate taxes, and they occur in two ways. One is if I relocate to Washington or I relocate to Oregon, let's use Washington as an example, and that's my domicile. The Washington estate tax encompasses all of my property throughout the United States. Even though I say, oh, well, I kept most of my California real estate and I was paying the California income tax on it, and I just moved there because I liked it. They're still going to tax those California properties. If that's my domicile, yes, they're still going to do it. Oregon, if it's my domicile, generally also yes, if it's my domicile. Be careful of the reverse of this example, which also—
I was going to mention that because a lot of our clients, they are actually California residents, but they have Washington State or Oregon State rental properties.
Yes, so be careful of the flip, which happens as well. I'm not an Oregon or California resident, or Oregon or Washington resident. I say, no, I'm convinced I like California, but I like to buy some houses in Washington or Oregon. Those, because they're real estate, are also subject to the Washington or Oregon estate tax. So if I pass away in California and I have Washington state property, I owe Washington state taxes Washington state estate taxes on that property that existed in the state of Washington. Sometimes the exemption can come into play, sometimes not. Sometimes it won't, depending on the particular state. Washington's estate tax is very aggressive, or you could say thorough, or you could say aggressive. Very hard around the Washington state estate tax. If I own the property, it's there. If I say, well, no, I'm going to form an LLC and put the properties in the LLC, and I'll own the LLC, and in fact, I'll do a California LLC, like approaching, Washington. Washington says, no, we look through all of that. It's Washington state. Oregon, you can do a little bit of this with. Oregon, their estate tax generally is, if I'm the title holder, I'll be subject to the Oregon estate tax. But if I use an LLC planning and own outside of Oregon, Oregon will often, their code doesn't tax that. So there's some planning. You'd have to take a look if you own these property in other states. So that's something to be aware of. Estate tax, where are you domiciled? Or even you say, well, that doesn't apply to me. I'm not moving to Washington. But do you own anything in Washington? Because maybe you actually do own it. Minnesota, New York, other places, take a look. It may be in play.
我觉得这个也是我们在加州可能大家忘掉的，就是加州没有州遗产税。我们通常讲的遗产税实际上是 federal 遗产税，虽然大家觉得这个税率已经很高了，现在40%，以后会达到45%，但是如果你想一下，就是我们这个加州实际上是没有遗产税的，这个40%、45%实际上是联邦的遗产税。但是你如果在像比如说 Washington State 或者 Oregon 还有其他的一些州的话，如果有州的遗产税的话，那实际上你会在 on top of that 你会有更高的这个税务方面的负担啊。所以你的继承人在继承到资产，可能在缴完税之后，可能并不剩下多少了，因为大部分的资产可能都要消耗在这些程序上以及税务上面。OK， 好，那我们接下来就简单，因为时间的原因，我们就简单的讲一下，就是关于如果说你要搬到其他的州，有哪些你需要注意的地方。我觉得第一个我们就是列在这边的 bona fide， 这个其实是非常重要的，就是 Michael 律师可以这个给我们讲一个他的真实的一个案例。
Yes.
什么叫 bona fide moving？
I think I've given this example of a case many times because I like it so much, because it's just such an elegant and very, very good case, is be very careful about the idea of, I laugh. Be careful about trying to do tax fraud. It usually doesn't work. And what I mean by this is,
whatever you think about, the IRS may already think about it.
And if you think the IRS thought about it, the California Franchise Tax Board,
they are the most aggressive, I think.
The most aggressive. The
Yeah.
California Franchise Tax Board is extremely aggressive. And it's not like Nevada just appeared. It's not like this is some new thing, Nevada, that suddenly existed on the California border. It's been there, since it was Deseret for a while in 1850 when Utah and Nevada were combined. But the idea that Nevada is there as a tax haven is not some surprise for the California Franchise Tax Board. They know that it's there. And I give the example of this case of moving to another state, because I sometimes hear this a lot. People say, well, can't I move on paper, and just, claim Reno or claim Las Vegas? I see it actually more often with my Southern California clients try to broach this, because LA and Las Vegas is, a little bit, easier to get to because there's not a mountain in between, and people go there a lot. And they say, well, can't I just like rent something or like buy a little condo in Vegas, and I'll change my driver's license and that's enough? No, you have to have a bona fide move. You really have to spend 183 days plus per year in the state and expand your full lifestyle there. So, what do they look at? What do they look at in an audit examination? Yeah, they'll look at your driver's license. Where are you registered to vote? Obviously that one. Where is your car insurance? Nevada car insurance is very expensive. So, you have to re-license your cars, get your car's licensed there, and then you can't use your California insurance company. You got to get a Nevada insurance company. Say, okay, fine. You say, what about your health insurance? Say, oh no, I like Stanford Healthcare. No more state of Nevada system now. You don't live in California anymore. You can't use Stanford anymore. You got to go out there. As you see, this starts to get like, oh wait, it sounds like you're telling me I actually have to move and live there. Yeah, you actually have to move and live there. You actually have to spend all your time there. You have to, insure your cars there. Your cars have to be there. Your voting has to be there. Driver's license, healthcare. Classic question that they ask in every one of these audits is they say, when was the last time you saw a dentist? Where's your dentist? Where's your doctor? Where's your eye doctor? All of these things. Because again, if you're going to California, you're in California. The famous case about this, everybody, the slang calls it the Starbucks case, because basically it was some California person who was going to sell a closely held business. And they said, well, how about I just, move to Nevada. This was a Southern California one. Move to Nevada, live in Las Vegas, and we're going to, sell the company with a Las Vegas, as a Las Vegas resident. And I'm not going to pay the California tax on the sale of the company. Of course, they got examined by the Franchise Tax Board because they don't like this. And one of the things that they asked for in the examination was the wife's credit card statements. And it's called the Starbucks case because they just took, the FTB examiner just took a yellow highlighter that you can see here and just highlighted the Starbucks. And if you look at your credit card statement, it often says the city and the state of where the Starbucks was. And they were all in Newport Beach. And the examiner said, you live where you get your morning coffee. And if you get your morning coffee at Newport Beach, you live in Newport Beach. You don't live, I didn't see, Las Vegas NV next to all of the Starbucks. I didn't see, Wynn Hotel next to the, all of the Starbucks. I saw Newport Beach. So that meant you were here during all of that time. The worst thing was that when they counted it up, it was more than 183 instances, more than 183 days. I said, this shows you were physically, at least, unless you were driving back and forth, you were here over 183 days. That's bad. The other thing to remember, which you might not have seen, or it seems innocuous when you're a California person, is, and especially if you don't file your taxes yourself, you use a CPA, enrolled agent, or you just do it on TurboTax. Remember, the federal return is attached to the California state return. So California requires you to attach the federal return to the state return. Well, why does this matter? Remember, we went back to, if I own anything like a California rental house, I owe California taxes. This is a big way where California finds people, is that if I have any California source income, that rental house, I have to report the rents on that. I have to attach my federal return. And then when they say, oh, okay, you got $24,000 of rents from California and you'll pay the tax, okay. And they say, whoa, like person who sold the business, what's this 20 million on here? You say $24,000 and you say, 40 million is, under Nevada and doesn't have anything to do with us. Check that, double check that and make sure that's right. That's how you can have a problem there. So one of the things is that the way that the tax return is filed, they're gonna see it. The same way, if there's any, sort of thread that causes you to file a California return, or you say, well, I'm not gonna file California returns. Well, here's another thing of moving everything. Did you change all of your bank accounts to, you essentially reopen them or transfer them to Nevada, to the Nevada branch of Bank of America? Because otherwise, when it throws off the 1099 INT, it's going to throw it off with the report to California. California's going to look. Classic one, how they catch the Roth conversions is that it's still in the old brokerage, and then it throws off the conversion statement, and then they say, "Where's the FTB says, where's the return?" And then it doesn't come in, and then they ask questions. So if you move, you have to truly move.
我觉得就是这个也是，就是我们特别提醒客户的哈，因为每年都有很多的客户跟我们讲说啊，那个我要搬到有几个州特别 popular 搬走，那当然也有 最后搬走的、搬回来的。但是很多人就是最后其实考虑到各种因素，因为有的时候找我们咨询，我们就会跟他讲这些。刚才 Michael Lee 律师举这些例子啊，你是真的要搬过去，你的所有的健康保险、你的车保险、你的所有的生活的重心，包括子女的教育这些都要搬。然后甚至有的时候客户还想到说啊，那如果我一个人搬，另外一个人不搬，然后小孩不搬，就是各种这种 scenario。但是跟我们咨询了之后的话，都发现其实你是把自己就是放到一个特别危险的一个被 audit 的一个情况下，而且尤其是针对就是加州的 FTB， 它实际上是一个相对来讲非常 aggressive 的一个税务机构，所以你在做这样的一些 planning 的时候，就一定要特别的小心，要有专业人士的一些指导，然后要进行一些比较全面的一个咨询啊。然后另外就是这些，我们其实讲座之前有跟大家讲，就是你搬到另外一个州的时候，你要全盘的去考虑这个州的它的法律、它的税务系统。那可能不是说听这个，有的时候有一个人，比如说这个你的在德州的买房的经纪跟你讲这个，那你可能还是要 double check 一下，和当地的律师和会计师去 check 一下这个很多的法律是不是对的。然后或者说是这个有一些朋友可能讲的一些信息可能是比较片面的，你可能是要全面的去 examine 一下会比较好一些。然后另外就是说，考虑到刚才麦克利律师一开始也讲了，就是其实搬家，然后在哪儿退休是一个你要全面的考量的，你自己的你能不能接受？比如说有一些你的生活方式的改变，你平时就是像我们有的客户，他每一天都要打golf 的，那他如果搬到一个地方没有任何的 golf course，或者是打 golf 变得非常的昂贵的话，那可能这并不是你想要的。那再比如说这个有一些年纪大的人，你可能60多岁的时候你不会去考虑的问题，但是到了80岁、90岁的时候，你活到这个年龄的时候，可能就要考虑一些，比如说你可能没有办法去开车，然后你可能离医院比较远，离 healthcare 的 system。不是特别的便利，这些都是你需要去长期去考量的一些因素啊，我们就不具体的展开来讲了，因为时间的原因。那最后呢，再跟大家讲一下，就是说，如果说你考虑到其他的国家去 retire 的话，我这里面就是特别要提醒大家的，因为我们有不少的客户，其实他们在美国以前生活过，然后后来就想说这个工作之后退休到这个自己原来的国家。那这个时候呢，你必须要考量的是说你的身份要怎么去处理。那如果说你是美国公民，或者说你的另外的那个国家是允许说你是持有美国的护照和其他的国家的这个护照的话，那我觉得问题不大。那你可以根据美国这边的美国公民、美国居民这方面来去考量去做你的 estate planning。但是你要注意的是，如果是你是绿卡持有者，你不是美国公民的话，那你就必须要做一些特殊的一些考量，因为我们知道，在美国的法律当中，尤其是遗产税和赠与税方面，对于外国人和对于美国人、有美国身份的人的规定是完全不一样的。那你的免税额就会降低很多。那另外就是说，有一些资产可能像比如说像房产这样的资产，你就要在你放弃你的身份之前，要去做一些提前的安排。那最后呢，要提醒大家的就是说，在不同的国家有不同的遗产规划，这个我们之前上一次讲座我也有跟大家强调过，就因为大部分的国家的话。他们的遗产信托方面的法律是完全不一样的。虽然像有海牙公约，有一些签订的条约等等，但是实际上从现实的层面，法庭的执行的角度来讲的话，它的执行率其实是非常非常差的。那法官之间彼此并不能了解，就是这个彼此国家的法律，这些可能就会 create 一些在执行过程当中的困扰。我们作为第一线的律师的话，其实是经常遇到这样的问题的，所以千万不要我知道有一些律师可能会跟你讲说 OK， 你可以在美国去做一个这个will 遗嘱，然后处理你中国的资产，但是或者处理台湾的资产，或者处理其他地方的资产，但 从我们事务所的角度来讲的话，这样尤其是对于有一些有比较多资产的人士来说的话，这不是一个特别好的建议。你还是要在美国这边做好你自己的安排，然后在你其他的国家你要 acquire 资产或已经拥有资产的话，你再去跟另外的国家的专家去咨询，然后做出合理的财产和遗产的安排，这样才是最好的。好，最后呢，今天在我们讲座最后刚才我也有讲哈，就是欢迎大家
Oh, can we go back to that?
Oh, sorry. Let me, because it's already over the time. Let me just tell us, because I know some people want to leave. Let me just tell this so 我们下一次9月份的讲座，刚才有跟他讲了，就是说关于金融资产这方面的。如果说你有兴趣的话，可以扫码，然后报名。然后最后呢，就是有我们的联系方式。如果说你有任何的问题想要来去咨询我们的话，也欢迎大家你可以用微信的方式，用电话的方式。我们的电话是可以 take a text message 的，然后也可以用 email 的方式来联系我们。所以如果说你有任何问题想做咨询的话，也欢迎大家联系我们。那我们最后呢，就是讲座最后可能大概我们用2分钟时间 ，Michael 可以 conclude 你的 thought，然后我们可能回答1-2个问题。但是如果说现在想下线的朋友，因为也已经很晚了，你就可以下线。
Great. Just one thing that you might have touched on with will you keep your U.S. status if you're a permanent resident? If you are a long-term permanent resident, 15 years, or and in some situations over 8 years, there's a potential exit tax if you try to surrender your green card. And so you'll be taxed on that. So be careful about anything where one says, I'm going to change status from a U.S. permanent resident, a U.S. domiciliary to someplace else, because that has just an unbelievable amount of tax consequences all over the place. So be very careful about that. And then we had a question I'd like to answer here because it has a pretty straightforward answer. So I could just answer the question. A question was raised about if a husband and wife live in a common law state. So they live in New York or they live someplace else that's not community property state. And one of them or both of them buy a property in a community property state. Does that property get a double step up in basis? And the thinking is, well, it's in the community property state. And under the marital law, and actually under the probate law, it's quasi-community property, right? Oh, I saw some law somewhere, it's quasi-community property. Isn't there a double step up in basis? No, there is not. The IRS does not recognize quasi-community property as a kind of property. So this is in the Internal Revenue Manual, and this is also on, I think it's publication, I think it's 556 that they of the Internal Revenue Code, that it's publication 555 regarding community property. There is no such thing as like quasi-community property for the IRS. So they will use the law of the couple's domicile. So if you are in a common law property state, a non-community property state, it is going to be the non-community property system, the half and half system. So they don't recognize this, even though in a divorce, it's going to be treated as quasi-community property, or in probate, if you don't do a trust, it's going to be treated as quasi-community property. In the tax context, the IRS does not conceive of this as community property. There are some situations, some states have adopted this thing called a community property trust. Florida, Alaska, South Dakota, Tennessee, Kentucky, I think a couple of others have this. And Wisconsin has like opt-in community property. Wisconsin's okay because it's their state law property system. There are these community property trusts that are available, but they're untested whether the IRS is going to allow this and allow double step up in basis or not. It's an attempt to try to get the double step up in basis, even though you're not a community property state. So that's the answer to that. Unfortunately, the answer IRS wise is no. The IRS doesn't recognize this quasi community property as community property.
Yeah, I found out the explanations on the community property rules for this usually are very strict. I think there's this also a popular idea called community property contract, community property agreement, which is also subject to very strict scrutiny.
Yeah, the IRS basically, because the community property treatment is so favorable, they basically want you to be totally bound by it without sort of choice. So like California, as we have had seminars like on premarital agreements, you have to do a lot of work to try to not get California community property treatment. And basically the California Family Court in many ways reserves the ability to just say, nah, it's community property. So the IRS is strict that they say, well, California's strict on California property. You're kind of stuck with it. So we'll give you the tax benefit. But if you're in Florida, we don't want you picking and choosing. So they're quite strict. You're right.
Mm-hmm. And this question, I think, is very straightforward too. Is the property tax will be reassessed if you sell the property to a new buyer, and the property tax will be reassessed as to the new buyer.
Yes. Yes. I mean, if you sell a property to an unrelated person, and it's just Mike Lee to another person, it will be reassessed. Husband and wife, if I pass away, the federal capital gains step up in basis is not the same as the property tax.
I think, this audience, this person may be a little confused.
So do remember the capital gains step up in basis, the good one, that's for community property states, IRS franchise tax board that washes out the capital gains. It is not the local property taxes, which those, if husband and wife, either of them pass away, there is not a reassessment. There is not a change of ownership when my spouse passes away. Because again, that community property rule, we owned the whole thing. So the same way we say, when someone passes away, when they own the whole thing, the IRS says, well, they own the whole thing, we step it up. The same way we use that same argument to the local property taxes, which is, they of course know, they're follow the law. They say, if my spouse passes, she passed away, but because we both owned 100%, there's no change in ownership. So we get the best of both. We don't have a property tax reassessment for local. We do have a step up in basis for federal.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I think let's just do one more
Sure.
here. If I retire in mainland China, I still keep the U.S. citizenship, but I pay the U.S. taxes. Is there any limitation?
No, you keep paying the taxes, and again, you would file the 1040 non-resident. So you'd be basically the one the tax return of the U.S. citizen residing abroad, and you get a certain amount. It's only if your income is over a certain amount where the U.S. taxes come into play. So that would be something you'd want to explore in detail. What's your income going to look like in China? But there's no requirement in the U.S. for citizens that we say, you have to come back every so often or things like that. Your citizenship remains. So that is fine. In the same way, like some people ask about do you still need to file like your state taxes? And this can be complicated. Is what state, if you stop living, and I get this with a lot of people, if you generally reside outside the United States, what is your last state of domicile? And the question is generally, it's that kind of facts and circumstances. Where do you have property? If you own California properties and things, you'll still have to pay California tax, and you'll likely have a California domicile. If you don't have any real property, then maybe you can choose. Maybe you could choose something more like, Wyoming, and you'd have your accounts moved over there, and you'd say, well, that's basically the last U.S. state that I had any contact with. I declare that's the state. But I generally am going to remain living in Singapore, and I'm going to stay there the whole time because my wife's Singaporean, and we're just going to stay there. But I am a U.S. citizen. Then maybe I'd want to work to have my domicile be set as Wyoming, and there's a process to do that.
OK， 好的，今天特别感谢大家参加我们讲座，我们的讲座就到这里了，祝大家有一个愉快的夜晚。